All right, all right, all right. Looks like we're live here. Outstanding. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Soul Path podcast. Decided to go live here on YouTube this evening. Just had a lot of stimulating conversation lately. Stuff that causes me to consider what is the difference between what's real and what's not real, kind of fiction and fantasy, what is made up imagination and what is actual divination, for example, right? There's a lot of talk in certain circles these days along the lines of the evolution of consciousness, the unleashing of spiritual gifts, which is a very profound aspect of our humanity. It's something that people are naturally curious about, should be curious about, need to take that journey to experience that. And at the same time, there's a lot of BS out there, for a lack of a better way to say it, right? There's just a lot of bullshit. So how do we cut through the BS and learn how to discern accurately what is real and what is not real for ourselves? How can we know in our heart whether or not when somebody says they are channeling from the divine, that we're actually hearing the voice of God speak through another human being versus we're listening to somebody that's a little bit kind of caught up in like a super ego, right? Like not realizing the distinction between what they imagine is happening and what is actually happening, right? There are plenty of people who imagine that they're talking to God, up in little padded rooms. Some of those people live homeless underneath the overpass, right? So mental health is a serious issue. Schizophrenia is a serious issue. Multiple personality disorder. These are serious issues, and these are issues that are kind of near and dear to my heart. I have loved loved ones who have struggled with schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder and all of that, and it's really I come at it from an angle of compassion and kindness. It's really hard to watch somebody you love be detached and not able to make sense of life in a coherent way. And at the point in my life when I was experiencing that, I had to stand back and watch and think, wow, and it didn't seem like any amount of praying or fasting or praying or laying on of hands or speaking of tongues or, shamanic ritual, no amount of burning incense, no amount of sound therapy was able to heal some of this. So maybe there's something to it, right? Maybe it's not just this thing. Maybe it's real. Crazy is real, right? There are really crazy people in the world, and they believe with absolute certainty and conviction that they and their experience of spirituality is reality, right? And to a certain extent, we all do. So let's just be humble and say, to a certain degree, we all believe that our experience of spirituality is real, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't believe it. You see how that works, right? We have to believe it because it's our experience, and we wouldn't want to deny our experience. We can't really deny our experience, and yet there's something very, very subtle. The art of subtle distinction between illusion and imagination, between what's real and what's not real. So this is like on each of our own individual paths, the process of spiritual maturity, right? We gain greater clarity. If there was a hallmark of spiritual maturity, or like you have been on that path for a while, it's to be able to discern accurately, to see accurately, to have accurate perception, to be able to tell the difference between fact and fiction, between truth and story, right? I mean, it's all story, but some stories are rooted in reality, and some stories are just a complete distortion of reality. How do we know the difference? And why is this important? It's important because if we don't learn how to discern, and somebody walking down the street says, hey, by the way, the divine is communicating to me, and now we are speaking through he and who stands before you, and this is the voice of God telling me to tell you, or telling you now to go do this thing or not to do that thing, or this is, some life insight. Pause for a second, right? It could be that there's a prophet walking down the street who's channeling the divine and speaking to you. That's a possibility. I'm not going to rule that one out completely, right? So are we open? Are we curious? We don't have to be afraid of that. We just have to be able to discern whether or not we're dealing with some crackpot spiritual fruitcake, or if we're dealing with the real McCoy here. Is this like really gifted individual with a specific ability to tune into, tap into a dimension of reality that I don't have access to, and they're now communicating to channeling. Maybe they're channeling a loved one. Maybe they're channeling ancestors. Maybe they're channeling, Akashic records. Whatever channeling is going on, how do you know if it's meant for you? Should you receive that and take that as the divine? And I'll use the word take that as gospel, right? Not to be too tongue-in-cheek here. It's do we have the ability for ourselves to decide in real time if somebody shows up and says, I'm speaking on God's behalf and this is what God says, to accept that or reject that? Or we have to be able to maintain that authority to be discerning. That way we're not deceived and misled into thinking, this person's a spokesperson for God, and therefore, the divine is communicating to me through them, and I'm going to pay attention because I believe this is the universe talking to me. That's a pretty powerful place to be. A powerful dynamic, right? If you're in a place where you're like, wow, God is talking to me through this person. Maybe it's a pastor, a preacher, a leader. Maybe it is, the street prophet. Maybe it is a divine channel. Maybe it is somebody in a Facebook group. Maybe, whoever, wherever you're encountering this kind of experience where you're like spiritually unsure. You're like, I don't know if I buy that or not buy that. It kind of resonates, kind of doesn't resonate. There's some little flags going off, but they seem awfully sincere. They're awfully convinced that they're communicating and channeling the divine. So hell, maybe they are. And maybe they are, right? Let's just be humble. Maybe they are. Maybe they are. Are we curious? Are we open to receive that if that's in fact the case? How do we simultaneously not allow ourselves to be deceived or not to be misled, not to just buy hook, line, and sinker, whatever somebody says? How do we discern the very sincere crazy person from the very sincere, channel of the divine? I would say that this is not a head level distinction. I would say that most likely in any given scenario where you're trying to make discernment like that, there's going to be little flags, like little red bells, little uneasiness. There's going to be something in there that's saying, you know what, I'm just not sure. If there's any uneasiness at all, I would say take that as an opportunity to just maintain a healthy boundary. And then in your own time, when you're not caught up in the magnetism of the individual, right? So when we're communicating with people, I saw a gentleman one time, and all of a sudden he opens up and his eyes roll up in his head, and he is starting to speak in light language. I'm thinking, wow, this is light language. This is like New Age light language. This isn't like biblical speaking in tongues, which is light language kind of, right? It's like, but it's the same idea, and it sounds even kind of the same. I mean, I've been in circles and seen this happen in both places, and so there's very much a propensity in humanity to manifest in this way. I've never experienced it. I probably could mimic it sincerely and make people think that I was doing it. Just let's be blunt about it, right? It's not that hard. But at the same time, there is sincere, I believe, people speaking. Is it in the tongue of angels? Is it light language? What are they speaking? I believe that there are people that are sincerely experiencing that in their own special, unique way. And I also believe that there are people that are complete and utterly full of BS and just out there babbling because they're getting attention for it. So it's this ego hijacking spirituality to get attention, ego gratification, because they have seen it done once, because doesn't it feel kind of cool to be a spiritually elevated being? I mean, I'm an ascended master, right? Or are you not? Are you or aren't you? I don't claim to be an ascended master. I would never claim to be an ascended master. I would say that anybody who's claiming to be an ascended master is possibly not an ascended master, right? Reminds me of a story. I was at a yoga conference, and there was an ascended master. People come from all around the world, leaders of all levels and of all different flavors, and some truly wise and elevated beings. I believe in that. And being in the presence of that, you can feel that and experience that. Well, there's also the other, right, where you're in the presence of an elevated being. You're like, this kind of feels like Hollywood. This guy's got a lot of bling underneath that robe. So if that's where a person's at, then maybe that's not real sincere. Maybe they're not literally ascended, right? Maybe they've only ascended to the level of ego gratification at the grandest possible scale. So this a guy is going to come along and he's going to touch everybody on the forehead if you want to, be spiritually activated and all that. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's, and so it's the whole thing was to just be empty, right? To be an empty vessel and be willing to receive the divine gift, the divine light that's channeling through another human being. Again, guys, I'm totally open to this, right? So I'm in line. I mean, why not? If I can get the old, I use all the help I can get, right? If this guy can give me a little extra divine light, bonus, and I'm as empty and receptive as humanly possible. So in my mind, personally possible, maybe a better way of saying that, not to gratify my own ego. So I get there, I get in line, the guy's doing his thing, and kind of a long, awkward silence, and I'm just enjoying it. And then finally somebody taps me on the shoulder and it's like, okay, you can leave, like, oh, okay, great. I don't know if I got like a second dose or extra serving or what have you. So I just went over, sat down where my yoga mat was at, and everybody kind of, milled through the end of the line there. I was toward the end of the line. Anyways, everybody's breaking up and the guy says goodbye, blah, blah. I'm over, and I go over to the sideline. I start getting my shoes on, and my mat's all rolled up and sitting there. And that Seiji ascended master comes and he stands right in front of me, like right in front of me. And, he's kind of looking over his shoulder at me, and it's kind of like, I'm feeling very lighthearted. I'm feeling very open, like, wow, that was a nice experience. What a great place to be. And so it didn't occur to me at the time, but somebody, some people have this capacity to see auras, right? And so everybody's aura is a little bit different. And evidently, my aura is, my aura, right? It's unique, kind of a deal. And I've had some bizarre encounters in life where people were reading my aura and they come up and say something to me about it. I don't know what you're talking about, but hey, that's cool. I want to learn, right? So being open and curious, but also learning to discern, is this like a crazy woo-woo, spiritual nutcake, or is this like the legit deal? You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. That's been going on in my life for a long, long time. So at this point, I'm there, and that guy's standing in front of me, and I get this distinct impression about what's going on here. He was in my energy, right? Like I felt like, like I said, I was lighthearted, and I know in that state, we're said to be open and then potentially glowing. I don't see auras, so I don't really know. But somebody then, after everybody had left, came and said, hey, you're glowing. I thought, wow, I feel like I'm glowing, like, yeah, no, I can see it, like, for real, you're glowing. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. And I connected the dots, and I realized, this ascended master was standing right in front of me because my glowing, evidently, and this was the other person telling me that, my glowing was encompassing, like shining around him. So he's trying to stand in my glow, like, hey, look at me glowing over here, for anybody that can see the auric field. Anyway, so I just, was that guy an ascended master? I don't believe that he was an ascended master. I think that he was a spiritually evolved or spiritually advanced to a certain degree, but there was a missing point there. That maturity just kind of stopped, right? He got caught up in the spiritual gifts, and this in the Yoga Sutras, in the Bibles, and all the lineages that teach spiritual gifts. There's a burden of responsibility that comes with it, right? And a lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get spiritually woke and activated, and I'm going to align my chakras. I'm going to go out there and walk on water and lay on hands and do some healing and speak in light language and channel the divine and all that. Fabulous. Go for it. Knock yourself out. Run at it with your heart wide open, right? Again, that divine potential, that pure energetic seed that is you, that is a limitless potential. I couldn't even begin to imagine what's possible for you in your life. So you have to take that journey with curiosity and excitement about it. But again, the art of subtle distinction, right? You have to learn at some point the difference between your imagination and reality, right? So we have to learn to discern whether or not I'm just listening to my ego or listening to the voice inside my head say this or say that, or if a person feels like I am speaking on behalf of the divine. I mean, guys, can I just be blunt? I mean, that is a really high level of assertion, right? To make that claim, like essentially making the claim of being a prophet. Again, there's stories in the Bible, there's stories in all the wisdom traditions. So I'm not ruling out that this is possible. I'm just saying that by and large, it's probably not authentic the vast majority of the time, because the vast majority of the time, a human being who is going through this process of activation and spiritual realization is going to get caught up at the level of activating gifts, and I begin to identify with that. Wow, like I got all these gifts, and that becomes identity. So understand that my identity has now adopted this divine. It's not, we are in some sense all divine, right? We are expressions of divine intent. We are divine creatures. We create, we co-create the grand essence of everything that is, the sum of all, the sum and source of all, the eternal enigma, the great mystery of life. We are part of that, intimately connected to and expressing that at all times. So yes, we are divine. Yes, we are connected to divine. Yes, we are channeling divine at some level, in some sense. But to say that the words that are coming out of my mouth is a direct channel of divine communication, that is a whole nother level of claim, right? That's like saying, you should listen to me because God's telling you what to do coming out of my mouth. And when somebody's saying that, for me personally, there are a lot of red flags that go off, because I've heard this story before, and if I look around, I see that a lot of the peeps, that are making these kind of claims are pretty awfully human, and they still suffer from their own humanity and their own foolishness and their own damn ego, right? So this is just another human being. I can choose to listen and receive and be open to the fact that maybe God is talking to me through that person. This is how I handle that, right? At the mental level, this is how I receive that. When I was young and I realized I could learn anything, I realized I can learn anything from anyone. I can learn what not to do from somebody that's doing something stupid, for example. But I can learn a lot just from observation. I can learn a lot from my own stupid, foolish mistakes, right? But I can learn from anyone. So if somebody's telling me that they are communicating or channeling the divine, and if they're like out there and speaking in third person and really getting into it, like fully on convinced that they're speaking in the divine, then I have a choice to make. I could call BS and, go clashing in and challenge that and be like, I'm not buying it. Prove it. You know what I mean? Like, prove it. I want to see some levitation here. Like, okay, God, you want me to listen to this person? You want me to know that this person, not just some crazy crackpot, not some curbside prophet? Like, how do I know? Show me, God, open my mind here. Speak to my heart. Give me a sign. Rainbows and unicorns would be nice, because I'd like to know real clear here right now. Burning bush, what? You name it. Oh, don't be a doubter, right? We have to have faith as small as a mustard seed, and childlike faith and all that kind of stuff is the exhortation of traditional Western religion, right? And then of course the openness and the malleability of more modern, evolved consciousness, right? Looking at it from that new age perspective, spiritual activation, spiritual gifts, spiritual realization. Yeah, sure, okay. In that moment, I have to discern: is this person spiritually activated, or are they just batshit crazy? I have to make that discernment. That's a personal decision. Everybody's got to make that decision for themselves. And here's why I'm sharing this. It's because I've been in some groups recently where there are a lot of people, big numbers of people, hundreds of thousands of people getting together and sharing and talking about the spiritual journey, like the Soul Path podcast, for example. But there are groups, right? There are people that are plugging in, like-minded, and there are some traditional groups, and there are non-traditional groups, and there are, new age groups. There's every imaginable kind of group, right? So we find that tribe, our true vibe tribe, the people that we vibe with. Now, I can vibe in a lot of different groups, but I go into these groups and I'm there and I'm engaging and we're talking about the spiritual journey, and yes, because it's near and dear to my heart. But then I see somebody do this, this channeling or this, that, and the other, and I have to pause and evaluate in that moment: is this sincere and authentic, or is this imagination and ego, right? So I'm trying to make that discernment in the moment while simultaneously being open and receptive to the fact that maybe God's talking to me. I mean, God's always talking, life's always talking, the divine's always talking. How do you want to define it? However, a lot of times when I'm certain, I'm not saying this like, oh, maybe that person might have been a little bit like 50-50, they are full of it, right? No, I'm saying like with absolute certainty, some people are completely full of it. And I can tell you right when it's on the spot, like, here it is, it's ego on grand display. The ego has identified itself as divine. Understand that. The ego has identified itself as divine. And when the ego has identified itself as divine, we are a long way from reality. And a lot of this lofty spiritual gifting, right? Whether it's light language or speaking in tongues or, all this kind of stuff, this channeling, that again, not to diminish or take away from the authentic and sincere divine spiritual expression that is potential and happens, and has happened throughout the history of humanity, across the spectrum of humanity. I'm notwithstanding that. Back into the present day, when we're engaging in groups and we're trying to make that discernment in the moment, we have to know. Because if we're receiving this and believing that this is divine communication and it's not, where does that lead us? Right? I think that it's like the blind leading the blind. I mean, maybe it's leading us toward a cliff. Maybe it's leading us into misery and suffering. Maybe it's leading us into confusion or deeper into the house of mirrors, the mental mirage, which I think is most often where it leads. It's an ego echo chamber. It's like, bam, bam, like, oh, wow, now I'm in the presence, I'm in the presence of an enlightened being and I ascended master. And so now the ascended master is giving my ego attention. I'm giving the ascended master's ego attention. This is happening. It's a head level thing, and it's all imaginary. It's all created. It's all story. In the midst of that, there is still the divine connection, right? There is still the aspect that there are two divine creatures communicating. So yes, there is divine communication, However, is it being received as the voice of God, the universe talking right now? Like, without question? Does that make sense? Like, you have to stay curious. You have to stay open. The subtle art, or the art of subtle distinction. Can you receive with grace what you hear? Can you evaluate it at the soul level, not the mental level? Get out of the head for a second. That's where we get caught. Does it make sense? Try to, not try to. We can get triggered. We can get lost in language. We can get all caught up in that. And, literally not be able to see past the end of our nose, right? We can convince ourselves of anything. Think about all the limiting beliefs that we have. Think about all the stuff that we believe that is not actually true. There's no end to it, right? So knowing that, just being honest, like, we're part of the human condition is that I can convince myself of anything, right? I'm pretty much always convinced that I'm right, because if I wasn't convinced that I was right, then I wouldn't believe what I believe. I wouldn't think what I think. And this is the same, I believe, for everybody. It's a part of the human condition, my opinion. So when I'm making this distinction, I'm not thinking about it. I'm trying to sense it here. And this is a ripe opportunity to talk about where discernment comes from. Accurate perception is a specific application of the mental function, right? So this is a spiritually rendered use of the mind. Make sense? A spiritually rendered use of the mind. That means that through the inner awareness, a spiritual awareness, I'm now using my mind and bringing it to bear like a tool to grab a hold of something, to twist it, to take it, to carve it, to do what have you. And when I'm discerning, there's an aspect of that, but the initial impression actually comes from something deeper than. So by the time that our mind is engaging the mind of another person, through communication, through language, there's already been a whole lot of communication going on at the subconscious level, at the energetic level. So the electromagnetic field around our heart is so much bigger and more powerful than our mind. We feel and perceive somebody long before we think and identify. And that's even another layer of gut level, right? You have 40 million in the heart, there's neurons in the gut. We're an intelligent antenna. So we're always getting this information. And that's the root of discernment, right? So if we're trying to engage and discern and figure out, is somebody telling me the truth or not telling me the truth? Is this actually God talking to me? Is this really a divine channel, or is this actually just a crackpot? I'm trying to discern that. It's not a head level discernment. When we get caught up in the language, that's how we get whipped up. That's how people end up in cults, right? We end up in clubs that are very, very exclusive because we've been caught up in the language, and that language leads us into the illusion deeper, so that we become incapable. Eventually there's no tangible point of reality, right? Because we're so caught up and identified with the story that's based on illusion. So that's a very real thing that happens. Again, talking about the people that are suffering from the very real schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, things like that. It's a real condition, and we're all at some sense, not in the clinical sense by any means, but in some sense, we're all capable of that fracturing of identity and of buying into something that is not based on reality. So it's just kind of part of having a human brain and how it works. So when we're trying to discern, that subtle distinction is not a head level distinction. Learn to get out of the head and into the heart, because the heart is perceiving the energetic intention of the other person long before the mind is ever there. And so again, maintaining that initial boundary, being open and curious, right? So we need to be open and curious, not afraid, not fearful, not like, oh my gosh, is this person trying to trick me? Or I don't believe it, that's a bunch of BS, so I'm just shutting down, I'm closing down, I'm rejecting somebody else's spiritual expression. I mean, that happens, and that's not necessarily, it's not always good and it's not always bad, but let's just say it's preferable to stay open and stay curious and trust the authority of your own heart, trust the authority of your own spiritual inspiration, your own spiritual wisdom, your own innate wisdom, your inner knowing, that deep knowing. You can discern fact from fiction, truth from falsehood, imagination from reality at the heart level. You can know without having to get up in the story, without having to put a label on it. You can just know, and you could say to yourself, I just know. Like, I don't have to trust this person. I can listen and receive what they're saying, but I don't honestly believe that they are speaking on behalf of God. I just don't. And that's an okay place to be. We can do that with humility. We can do that without being, confrontational about it and all that kind of stuff. But here's a question for you. Here's something that I guess I'm actively chewing on this as I see this happening in groups, and I see people buying into, at times, what I know is clearly somebody that is not what they are claiming to be. Like, this is the classic, not really a spiritually gifted person or a spiritually ascended master or whatever. It's just somebody out there with the ego. They got the right language, they got the words, they got the vibe, they got the feel, and people are buying it hook, line, and sinker because people are wanting it. We're out there looking for leaders. We're out there looking for ascended masters. We're looking for wisdom, right? So people are buying it, even though what they're buying into is not based on reality. It's not true. And I can look at it two ways here. One way is to look at it and say, well, they're getting what they need for where they're at. And if it's helping them grow, great. Evaluate the fruit by its tree, in other words. So in that sense, in the sense that everything is connected and this is all a divine expression at the whole, then yes, there's divine working in there and helping people grow at where they're at. So there's that aspect of it, right? Simultaneously looking at it and thinking, if this person is not who they pretend to be and their ego is getting gratification from all these other people's adoration, that's a little bit sick. That's a little bit wrong, because it changes the dynamic, the social dynamic. And so now what if this person is they're claiming to be an ascended master or a divine channel or what have you, and all of a sudden they're monetizing on that, right? Because people believe that they're really hearing literally the voice of God come through this other human being, and they're speaking what feels like and appears to be truth into their life, and so they're into it. Well, if they're getting ripped off, essentially, right, by the hustle, by the slick person that has high EQ, somebody that's able to read people and be in that. I mean, it's stereotypical, right? It happens in Christianity. I guarantee you it happens in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Judaism, and Islam. There are false prophets. There are people that are pretending to be pious spiritual leaders, but in reality, they're just people out there, craving attention and seeking to use the innate human need to seek out spiritual leadership to their own advantage, just to gratify their ego and line their pockets. And it just breaks my heart. It not only breaks my heart, as it pisses me off. And how do I, this is the question, how do I help in that situation? Do I stand up in the middle of the room and wave my hands and say, hey, time out, everybody. Hey, I got ask pointed questions that might potentially portray the ascended one in a negative light? Well, that's kind of humiliating. That's conflict, right? That's challenging. There are going to be those that defend and those that hear. I don't know if that's a good thing. It's kind of messy, right? Do I directly approach the spiritual leader and call them out and confront them right there in front of God and everybody? Like, believe me, if anybody, we all have a gift, right? My gift is the gift of discernment, buddy. I see clearly and accurately what is and isn't bullshit, and I'm calling bullshit on you, right? So if that was the mode, how to make the sense of it, right? I don't know. It just kind of leads to conflict. So, what's the practical solution? And this is what prompted the podcast. The practical solution is to share kind of that systematic process. How do we learn to fine tune the subtle art of discernment, that subtle distinction? It's not a head level distinction. We can't evaluate somebody's spiritual authenticity based on their language alone. We can't evaluate somebody's spiritual authenticity based on the vibe or the garb or whether or not they're wearing a robe or they've got rings on or whatever. We can't evaluate somebody's spiritual authenticity based on their own conviction, right? Somebody can be so totally convinced and so passionate and so on fire about what they're saying. That doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is true or right, right? We understand that, I think, at the logical level. So it's not evaluating at the head level. It's not evaluating at the language level. It's evaluating at the heart level, at the level of intuition, of deep inner knowing, of spiritual discernment. Can you feel the intention of the individual? Can you sense that? Can you sense the truth in their words or sense the error in their words? Can you see the part that's good and also see the part that's a little bit distorted, that's just a little bit human? If somebody's claiming to be a channel of the divine, then you should be able to clearly see the divine presence shining through. Can you also discern and see or make the distinction of where the ego or the mind or the humanity that is still there in that person, right? Even if we receive that this person is channeling and divine communication is coming through, we're receiving that, we're open, we're curious, we still need to be able to maintain an accurate distinction between the person's innate divinity, potential spiritual gift, and the fact that they're still human, right? So the ego is still there, the mind is still there. And if you can't identify it, red flag, it's there somewhere, right? Like that's, it's really hard to sometimes question somebody. For example, to go back to the story of the yoga guy, the guy in the white robe, I wouldn't want to question or challenge that guy in the group because, I mean, there were people there that were like, washing the guy's feet. They really believed that he was an ascended master. And so it would just be my ego coming crashing into the party to try to make a big hoop about it, right? So I need to be able to receive what I can receive from this guy without allowing myself to get caught up in the story. And that's kind of the secret, right? It's humility. It's humility and it's honesty. Honestly, in my heart, I don't know whether to believe or not believe this. And if that's the case, if you find yourself at that point, in the evaluation of somebody's spiritual authenticity of a ascended master or a leader or a channel or what have you, if you're at that point and you're just not sure whether to believe or not believe, that's a good indication. It's a good point to just take a step back. Take a deep breath. Maintain that boundary, because again, just like that, long before we're communicating at the level of language, head level communication, we've felt somebody else's presence. We're engaging at that level. We can feel it at that level. We need to maintain healthy boundaries at that energetic level. Does that make sense? So open and curious can be there behind boundaries, healthy boundaries, where I don't have to believe what this person is saying. I don't have to take them at face value. I have every divine right, every authority within myself to make that distinction, to make that discernment, learn how to discern at the heart level. Maybe I just need to take a step back and evaluate, how does this feel? Does it feel right? Does it not feel right? And then again, feeling. Let me just hold on to that word for just a second, because I'm not talking about emotion. Not like rah, charismatic. Yeah, this guy's amazing. Holy smokes, I need a little bit of this guy's glitter, right? We can get caught up in charisma and all of that kind of stuff. This is how, again, cult leaders are gone. People are out there actively making outrageous claims, and people are believing them every single day. So this is part of humanity, right? It behooves us as individuals to learn how to discern and make the distinction. We just have to. But then, if we don't, I guess, like a sheep being led to slaughter, right? If you fail to make the discernment, if you fail to take that time to take that step back to tap in to what's going on here, if you just get caught up in the excitement or caught up in the language, again, where does that path lead? I don't know. So guys, that's my heart tonight. It's heavy on my heart. How best to help people in that situation? How best to help somebody that is clearly being deceived? Do I do nothing and stand by? I can't. I have to say something. That's why I'm doing the podcast, right? In those group discussions, I got to say something. I'm glad that at that yoga retreat, somebody came up and said something to me, and we had that conversation about it. Have the conversation about it. Question everything. Like zoom over to the atheist camp for a minute. Be totally skeptical and question everything, and then see what fits. What fits with reality. And make room for some magic, make room for some metaphysical, make room for the spiritual journey, make room for infinitely diverse spiritual expression, right? Make way for divine intent, a curious exploration of infinite potential. This is what's driving the cosmos, right? As much as it's driving the conversation, as much as it's driving any divine channeling or tarot card reading or laying on of hands or any other spiritual gifts, spiritual manifestation, those things are actually happening. It's just important to discern what is and isn't authentic, right? What is and isn't distorted? What is and isn't actually deception? To what degree are we being deceived? To what degree are we being self-deceived, right? In the moment, maybe we want to believe. Maybe we're like, you know what? I really need to believe that this guy is actually the ascended master. I need to believe that because I need an ascended master right now. Maybe that's where we're at. But again, not evaluating that at the head level. We have to learn to listen to the wisdom in our heart. Is this true, authentic, actual spiritual expression, or is this just ego all cloaked up in some pious robe or some sparkly, new age bullshit? Depending on where you're at, you're gonna get both. And anyway, so that's my heart, is just to share that and have this conversation so that we can all together elevate our discernment, right? Learn. It's important to honor the gifts, but it's also important to evaluate them and call it out potentially. If somebody's out there making claims that are not true, I'm not sure that we should just let that one go. But hey, I'd like to know what you think about that, right? So that's the two forks, just to let it go and then see the good in it, or to say, hey, you know what? That's not right for people to be deceiving other people, calling it channeling the divine and then pocketing the money, right? It doesn't feel right to me. It feels wrong to me. So that's why I had to say something. And that's been the content here for this episode of the Soul Path podcast. It's been a big week, actually. A lot of interviews last week. This week, I didn't schedule any interviews. I've been finalizing the Soul Path Masterclass. The Soul Path Masterclass is the bomb. I'm super excited about it. So it's like 30 videos, right? Over 5 hours of content, training people how to connect the head with the heart and figure out who they were born to be, what they were born to do, to create that meaningful action plan to define their mission to go out there and make that happen. So I'm excited to be sharing that here. I'll be leaking out little, what do they call it? Like sneak previews, like trailers, right? I want to share because it's just been fun. It's been a process. It's been over a year making this masterclass, and just wanting to make sure I'm doing it right, that I'm honoring my heart, sharing the experience that's life's taught me so I can share, and we can share together. We can grow faster. So excited about that. And with that, guys, it's been great. I've seen people popping in and out, always fun. I just thought I'd jump on and go live this evening while I record the podcast. I'll get it edited and uploaded this evening. And of course, the live will be here. So please, if you're enjoying the conversation, like and subscribe. You got questions, drop them down below and feel free to engage the conversation because I'm here for you. So with that, peace. I hope you guys have a terrific evening, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. I'm out. All right, there we go.